Greetings, humans. There were so many cosplay options at the dollar store that I had to split this into 2 videos. So, part 2, here we go. Today I am visiting the Dollar Tree in hopes of finding and pointing out to you guys all kinds of different things that are useful for cosplay that you can get at the dollar store. Here we have a variety of earbuds and USB cables, and while part of me is like, why would you chop that up and use it as part of a costume? If you're spending $1 to get a piece of actual wiring like this, that it can be an invaluable addition to any type of mechanical costume pieces where you need to have wiring. Say if I was going to do a Borg costume from Star Trek, I'd probably get a couple of these to incorporate some wiring and tubing into the costume. Tape is useful for everything. We've got duct tape, which of course will hold a lot of things together and can also give it some interesting texture. We have some in here that actually has some cool designs and colors to it. Here's painter's tape, which you can use obviously if you're repainting things. We've got some trash picker uppers right here, which can be extremely useful because of the mechanical component they have in them, where you have this handle with a lever in it and a cord that goes down and actually controls the motion on that. You can use that to create any type of motion activated aspect to a costume, such as a giant crab claw or an arm for Doc Ock that you want the end to be able to move. Toys like this will again give you small components that you can glue onto larger pieces to add just like a little bit of mechanical or design kind of features to it. Same thing's going to go for pieces like this and this, that obviously they have uses of their own, but you can attach them to things, repaint them, and make them look like something totally different. A few things that you might actually use for what they're intended for. Got super glue, epoxy, stuff like that you can buy cheaper here and not have to worry as much about how much you're spending on things like glue and tape as you're putting them together. We've got some Velcro, which you can sew into a costume if you need to. We've got some nice paracord that again you can use for lacing. We have some actual coils of rope here if you need larger amounts of rope or cord for a costume. And again, this kind of rope can actually be repainted because it's made of nylon, so it'll hold spray paint. And of course there are always glow sticks. Now, obviously these are going to be one use, but if you are doing a Tron costume, or if you need to make a lightsaber, get some of these longer ones that are meant to be necklaces. Anything where you're going to have some kind of glowing mechanical component, you can just slip a few of these little glow sticks into it. You'll have to replace them every time you wear the costume, but that's definitely an easy option if you don't want to wire something up with LEDs. Crafting aisle, again, we're going to have some gimmies in here. This is obviously going to give you a lot of options when you have entire packages of beads and double-sided tape and tiny glass jars and thread and clamps and all of these things that are going to be very obviously useful for costuming. So I'm not going to bother going through and being like, oh, you can use these things, because, well, obviously that's what they're for. Here in hair care, though, I'm not seeing a lot of fabric headbands here. Those are kind of hit or miss. Sometimes you get fabric headbands. These are a little bit loose and floppy, but headbands are great. You can use the hard ones as well, though I prefer using the soft ones, to attach ears or horns or headdresses or crowns to. These little hair donut things here are also extremely useful for styling wigs. If your wig isn't quite big or full enough and you need it to be up in buns or braids or something, you can stuff that in to add a little extra volume. Pantyhose can also be super useful. Obviously you can wear them as pantyhose, but you can also, for example, stuff them with cotton to create leku for a Twilight costume. You can chop pieces off of them and use the netting kind of material to create other things. I've used pantyhose before to create webbed hands. You can stretch it over your hand and stitch between the fingers to create that webbing, and then you can paint it, glue things to it, whatever you need to get the design you're looking for. Floral section is often my favorite. You have these little wreath mold, wreath base things that can give you a lot of really nice heavy duty wire. I've pulled these apart before and used them as the framework for wings. And here's some, older style looking robe if you need that. And of course, flowers are always useful for attaching to costumes. We have some little pearls and gems that can also be very valuable for decorating costumes. This is also where you're going to find a lot of ribbon and tulle options that you can use. The floral foam here, these little frog things, are great for carving into shape. They do tend to be a little bit chunky and styrofoamy if you get them from, well, a dollar store, but you can still carve them into some interesting shapes. You can also get all these glass pieces, stones, moss, all of which can be attached to costumes or props, especially if you're doing any kind of elf or nature spirit or anything like that that might have, you could use these for a mermaid, anything that might have these more natural looking things. These little mesh tubes are also great. One thing that I've seen them used for that's kind of fun is for a almost mechanical looking hair. You can use them almost like dreads and make wigs out of them and, repaint them. But you can also use them as they are. Again, if I was going to do like a Borg costume from Star Trek, I would get some of these to create some tubing. But this general household stuff can be good too. Shower curtain rings gives you, either you can keep them in a stack like that and use them, or, just having some rings to attach things to. Little soap dishes and stuff will often give you some really cool shapes, designs that you can use. You might attach those, use those on your shoulder as part of a suit of armor. These little things, again, you're getting some really wonky shapes. You might incorporate that into, some sort of a gun. Bottles, again, you could you could probably make an entire jetpack out of baby bottles. That would be funky. Getting into the health and beauty section here now, we're going to start finding somewhat fewer things that are useful. Band-aids actually are oddly useful. You can use them for emergency cosplay repair if you don't happen to have the tape or glue you need. Obviously, if your costume calls for wearing band-aids, then, that's helpful. Sponges like this are great for painting and texturing, especially if you want something to look sort of aged and worn. If you're giving a coat of paint on, say, some scratched up armor, rip off a chunk of this sponge and sort of dry brush with it. The net bag itself that this is in can also work as a really interesting stencil to create some scaled kind of patterns on things. Nail polish can actually be a great option for painting small items, especially if you have need for gems or iridescent sections on a costume. You can get the sparkly nail polish and use that like paint. All right, now we're getting into food. There's going to be fewer and fewer options along here, but it's definitely worth keeping in mind that some of these bags themselves can be valuable. Some of them can have interesting textures or designs on them that you could use in making a costume. Straws are great. Having these plastic straws like that, you can make all kinds of different things out of those. Whether they be, these guys are wrapped, these guys are colorful, if you want some of that translucency in the color. Soda bottles, once they're empty, you can use the plastic, you can cut that with a scalpel, you can reshape it, you can melt and kind of reshape it with a heat gun, but it's a little bit unpredictable how it melts and twists. Again, this is all just food and snacks. You're not going to have a whole lot of options in here, though some of the packaging, cardboard boxes and stuff might be useful. But now as we get into this section where we have more food containers and kitchenware, now there's going to be a little bit more of an option. Again, Tupperware, kind of like those plastic boxes that we looked at earlier, these can be used as various shapes to build and glue together into other things. Kitchen section, we're getting into some more useful potential things here. We have some of this microfiber fabric, which you could use for something. These non-slip rugs here, these have some really interesting texture to them that you can use as is or use as a stencil. As you come through here, placemats will give you small amounts of interesting designed fabric that you could cut apart and use for other things. One of the most useful things that I found in here are these single-use baking pans, because they are stiff enough to hold their shape, but thin enough to be easily cut and bent. So you can create all kinds of interesting things out of these if you need anything that's made of metal. That doesn't do the trick. There's also foil, and obviously you can get foil anywhere, but hey, why not get it for $1 while you're here and use that to wrap anything that needs a metallic look, this is one really useful thing that you don't actually find at regular grocery stores, is that instead of selling fully made mops and brooms, they sell the pieces separately. So they sell broom handles, which are not actually attached to brooms or mops. So this gives you a 4-foot long rod that can be easily used as the core for scepter, spear, sword, whatever you want. Finish up in the seasonal section. Obviously this will vary depending on what time of year you come into the store, but we have some awesome little pieces of chain here, these funky little bulbs that you could use for a dozen different things. I think that would be some kind of really fun alien eyes or something. Brackets here that could be used, incorporate into, I could see using this as like the stock of a rifle or something. All kinds of interesting plastic shapes here for planters. My first thought here is use something like this as the base for a helmet. These little plastic ones in particular, these are thin and flimsy. They could easily be cut to put, eye holes, face holes in it, and then, maybe paper mache onto that, or build onto it with metal or foil or something to give it the design that you want. Obviously there's more flowers here. You can use those for whatever you might need flowers for. Down at the end here, since we've got some Valentine's Day stuff out right now, this again is going to give you access to small amounts of fabric, which may or may not have a design that you want, but this is some decent quality, thin, filmy kind of fabric. Another selection of baskets and plastic containers, which again you could cut apart or use these kinds of, this actually might be a really useful one to cut apart because it has this grid pattern here that would easily be redone to look like metal or wood depending on how you want to paint it. And they've got the St. Patrick's Day stuff out, so here we actually have two different shapes of hats, these rounded bowler looking hats and these sort of squat top hats. All of these of course are really cheap, flimsy, but they could easily be repainted or recovered. Use them as a hat base to get some pretty good results. So today I'm not actually buying any pieces to use. I didn't have a specific costume in mind. This was just kind of a run through to get a sense for all the options that are here, all the kinds of things that you could do with it. But I'm definitely planning on coming back another time in hopes of finding everything that I need for specific cosplay. So I'm going to challenge myself, pick a cosplay, and then acquire the materials for it solely from the dollar store and see how good of a cosplay I can put together. So if you have suggestions for what character or what type of costume I should do for that, go ahead and leave those in the comments. I would love to hear your opinions. As usual, if you want to see more of my stuff, like, subscribe, all of that usual YouTube-y nonsense. And until next time, fare thee well.